Hello, and welcome to Converging Dialogues. This is Xavier Bonilla. On this episode, I'm very excited to bring the conversation I had with Ruy Teixeira. Ruy is a sociologist, political commentator who writes on many issues, mostly of party coalitions and American politics. He's senior fellow at American Enterprise Institute, and before that, he was at Center for American Progress. He has a PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's the author of numerous books, including the most recent one, Where Have All the Democrats Gone? This conversation, I was super excited to talk with him. I have followed a lot of his writing, a lot of his work on politics, on the Democratic Party, but more specifically about the kind of emerging movement of many Latinos in the United States to the Republican Party politically. And I think that's been a really interesting and fascinating move, and on the reasons why that is. And so he's been writing about that for a couple of years now. And I think he has the best pulse on some of the underlying issues and reasons for that. And he's just got a really nice kind of way of looking at politics and trying to look at how Democrats are doing things honestly. So we start by talking about Democrats this year in 2024, how they're running, what they're running on, what their kind of program's about, and what they're for. We talk about why, in many ways, Democrats have abandoned the working class voter and have kind of pivoted to college-educated voters. We talk about immigration challenges with Democrats, the impact of populism on the right and the left, Latinos shifting to the Republican Party, many cultural issues, and a whole slew of other topics. Again, I really, really was looking forward to this conversation, and it didn't disappoint. Ruy is such a sharp mind on these things, and I really appreciate his viewpoint and really how he's trying to say, listen, Democrats have a lot they can show for their times in office and some of their policies and many of the bills that have passed. Why aren't they doing that so much? And what's the kind of messaging and what are some of the other dynamics? And so it was such a wonderful time talking to him about it and kind of almost commiserating over some of the frustrations we have with the party and on the left. And he's just fantastic. You can find him over at his Substack as well, which is included in the show notes. I read it myself weekly, so it's great. You should get the book, Where Have All the Democrats Gone? And as always, you can find this conversation and all other conversations at convergingdialogues.substack.com. You can also find it on YouTube. So like, subscribe, share, contribute if you'd like. I really appreciate when folks do that. It's very, very helpful, makes the podcast better. But really it means a lot when people engage and they share with their friends and keep spreading the word. It's the best way that the podcast spreads is word of mouth. So I really appreciate when people do that. And now I bring you Ruy Teixeira. I'm here with Ruy Teixeira. Ruy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm greatly looking forward to speaking with you.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You have a fantastic book out that I absolutely inhaled. I consumed it. It was fabulous. It's called Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes. This is with a co-author. What's the co-author's name again?
John B. Judas.
Yeah. So,
he's the guy I co-wrote The Emerging Democratic Majority with around 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is, in a way, it's a sort of sequel.
Yeah, you make reference of that in the book, which is very interesting. Before we get into it, why don't you tell listeners just a kind of brief summary of who you are professionally, academically, and anything else, and any particulars you want to share with what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I'm a sociologist by training, kind of a political sociologist out of UW-Madison. I wound up going the think tank route. I've been in the various think tanks. I've been at Brookings. I've been at the Progressive Policy Institute, the Century Foundation. And I was actually for a long time at the Center for American Progress, which is the largest kind of think tank on the left that's sort of affiliated albeit informally, with the Democratic Party.
Mhm.
And I was there for almost 20 years, and then I decamped to the American Enterprise Institute, where I'm currently a senior fellow, partly for, a lot because of some of the things that are outlined in the book about how I felt the Democratic Party was losing its way, was adopting, sort of various priorities and even language that were not really well designed to reach working class voters. And it was a stultifying atmosphere. So I left. So I'm now at AEI, and I also politics editor of the Liberal Patriot newsletter, which I urge everyone to subscribe to.
Yeah, please subscribe. It's great.
Contributing columnist to the Washington Post. And as Xavier was mentioning, have a new book with John Judas, Where Have All the Democrats Gone? And as that title suggests, and my previous work suggests, primarily I study political coalitions, voting behavior, political demographics, really trying to understand the ways in which the American electorate is evolving and the different party coalitions and how they're succeeding or not succeeding in building a majority. So that's a lot what the new book is about how the Democrats, in a sense, have stalled out. And Republicans and Democrats are now at these loggerheads where, despite the obvious weaknesses of each party, neither party can really dominate the other, which I think is a fair statement at this point. And now we're moving into this bizarre 2024 election where we get this Trump-Biden rematch, which I think is not exactly sort of the dream matchup that most American voters had in mind. So there we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the dream matchup. And I was going to say you're forever evergreen because it's an election year. So I'm sure there will be more themes of this on the podcast and many podcasts and many people are talking about things. So one of the things I appreciate about you is you do keep things kind of on a lot of the numbers and the data and less about, kind of rhetoric and ideology, which is, pundits are kind of annoying in that way. So there is seemingly a shifting that has been kind of percolating for some time, at least on the left with Democrats and to another extent on the right with Republicans. So I guess in this election year, what is the Democratic Party kind of looking at? I remember in 07, 08, people were very buoyed by, Obama and this great, multicultural coalition and all different groups and classes. You can talk about this in the book as well. And 12 was fine. And then 16 just kind of, it was like someone threw a grenade in the room and just kind of spoiled all of that. And now here we are in 2024. What's the state of the Democrats and what they're doing politically? And why is it very bleak and negative at this point? I feel like they have a lot of things that they've done, but they can't sell it. They're losing people. So what's the state? What are we doing in 24 as we enter this election cycle?
Right. Well, I think the 2008 election does make an interesting contrast because that was an election that seemed to instantiate what John Judas and I talked about in our book, The Emerging Democratic Majority, where these various constituencies would come together that were warning and actually give the Democrats a significant advantage in a lot of national elections, and that they were better positioned than the Republicans to respond to the changing demographic, economic, and ideological nature of America. And Obama was able to run on a pretty positive campaign, right? Hope and change. We're moving into a different America. There's no blue America, red America, black America, white America, one America. And we can move together towards something that's a lot better. Now, contrast that with today, and it is quite a contrast because I think both parties are essentially going to run on how awful the other party is. And that includes the Democrats, who are, as far as I can make out, they're going to run on two main things. One, Trump is really bad and a danger to democracy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Biden is now elaborating that theme in many different ways, and he's not sparing the rhetoric. And the second thing is abortion rights. Republicans are going to take away abortion rights. So those are two primarily negative takes on the Republicans. And obviously, the Democrats did manage to accomplish a fair amount legislatively under Biden's first term. But most people aren't paying that much attention to. They don't even know that much about a lot of these so-called accomplishments. And people's views of what the administration has managed to accomplish and about the economy are quite negative. So they would love to run in the economy. They would love to run in their accomplishments, but they're not quite sure how to do it. So they're going back to the tried and true, which is to run on democracy and abortion rights. And that somewhat connects to some of the themes of the book, where we talk about how the party, in terms of its strategy and its orientation toward these different demographic groups, has really shifted away from the working class and toward moderate to liberal college-educated voters, which is really what they built their current majority, such as it is, on. They've been losing working class voters left and right for a number of years. Big time in 2016, building on previous losses. That's how Trump got to be president, in the white working class. And then we've seen since then an attrition among non-white working class voters. So generally speaking, the Democrats, while they still purport to be the party of the working class and the party that is for the welfare of working people, et cetera, the working people themselves are less sure about that these days. And they're not giving them their votes the way they used to. So what do Democrats rely on? They rely on the more, the college-educated part of the population, which is much more sympathetic to their views, their cultural priorities, and so on. And we're seeing that, I think, coming into this election, that great divide that opened up in the United States in the late 20th century, which became accentuated in this century, is something Democrats are somewhat accepting of, I think. I mean, education polarization, what can you do? The working class people are bailing out on us. They're not the good people. They're not the people who have the right point of view on a lot of these issues. They're manipulated by Fox News and by Donald Trump. Basically we just have to run on who we are, which is the anti-MAGA, pro-abortion rights party. And we're the party that's for the glorious multicultural, multiracial future, which awaits us all. And if you don't like it, screw you.
Yeah, I mean, this is you're absolutely right. This is exactly how they're running it, and I don't understand why. Shouldn't it be? Certainly, you should hit Trump hard for a lot of things. I think there's a lane for that, but at the end of the day, that's not really a winning kind of thing of like, the orange man is bad and vote for me. Like, you're not really selling yourself. You're just saying how the other guy sucks, and it's like, okay, like. Sure, and there's an angle for that. And I've heard this other thing about the abortion rights thing. I know there was a big deal in 22, and it really, I think kind of surprised me. It was a big deal in a lot of ways for that. And obviously Roe v. Wade, a lot of momentum on that. But I just don't think that issue alone is going to get people out to vote for an 81, almost 82-year-old Biden. I think there's some of that for sure. I think for suburban women, that's sure of maybe right and left a little bit, but I don't really see that as enough, I guess. And then I guess second to that is why aren't they selling their economic package? I mean, in many ways, the bipartisan infrastructure bill was or is. I mean, a white working class bill. I mean, if this was, if Trump or any other, Bush or any other Republican would have done this, I mean, they would have been blasting this nonstop. I don't understand how it's not like they don't have legislative wins. Overwhelmingly across the country, you get outside of DC or New York or LA, and you go around to small towns across the United States, people care about three things all the time: economics and jobs, education, and healthcare. So why aren't they selling that? Why are they relying on this guy sucks? They're going to take away your rights for women's rights, but not all of these like kind of legislative wins that they have. Why aren't they using that?
Well, I think that gets back to what I was previously alluding to. It's in a way the Democrats have had this like long goodbye to the working class. It really does start in the late 20th century. The decline of the labor movement is very important in terms of removing a cultural anchor from the Democratic Party that kept them more focused on how working class people actually think about the world. The Democrats did sign on in the late 90s, and actually until very recently with the Biden administration, what you might call a soft neoliberalism in terms of their economic approach, primarily oriented toward markets, don't interfere with business.
Yeah.
We must maintain business confidence. We can't spend too much money, et cetera, et cetera. And none of that really went over that well with working class voters, because even if they may have had their own, sort of reservations about taxes and government, they still wanted government to help them somehow. And I think a lot of these voters felt the Democrats gave up on them. So Democrats over time have evolved away from being even that connected to working class concerns, and even that connected certainly to their culture, and tending, as I say, to look down on them in a lot of ways. And I think that moves them away from making a serious effort to try to pitch their economic program, such as it is, and what it's accomplished to these voters, because I think in the way they get easily frustrated. Hey, look, we tried talking about Bidenomics. Remember that? It's like, have you heard the good news, brother? Bidenomics, which maybe wasn't a great idea because it combined two things people didn't like: Biden,
right,
and the state of the economy. And
right.
called it Bidenomics. People said, "Nah, I don't. I'm not signing up for that." So I think that was very frustrating for them. And there's a ton of Democratic-oriented commentary, which basically they can't understand why people aren't happy. It must be because they're being manipulated or misinformed. And what can we do about that? It's almost like they feel hopeless about it. But one way I think about this, Xavier, is if you look at what Democrats have said about the economy of the United States for the last several decades, they've been talking about inequality. They've been talking about neoliberalism. They've been talking about communities devastated by economic change. They've been talking about how working class people are in many parts of the country being left behind. Why would they expect that to turn around in like 2 years, right? I mean, it's going to be hard to make this sell, and you have to be very careful about how you pitch yourself. And if people are worried about rising prices, for example, don't act like, well, that's over.
Yeah.
Inflation was transitory. Everything's great now. You should be happy. But inflation's a killer for most working class people, and they still haven't forgotten the spike in the first part of the Biden administration. They still haven't forgotten how much prices have risen since Biden took office. And they do have a comparison point to some extent of the Trump years before the pandemic, when inflation was stable and real wages and incomes went up faster than they have under Biden. So I just think it's hard for them to accept the fact that we're really going to have to work hard to make our case on the economy, on prices, on healthcare. We've got to focus on that like a laser.
Right.
And we can't give up. We've got to repeat ourselves constantly. And we got to have some faith that we can reach a significant amount of working class voters by doing that. But I think that, the low-hanging fruit for Democrats, and again, this connects to their changing demographic base, being much more among college-educated voters in metro areas, will go for the low-hanging fruit. These people hate Donald Trump. These people are absolutely apoplectic about abortion rights. So let's talk a lot about that. Let's make sure we get those voters out to the polls. And we'll hope that at the end we can sort of nudge ahead of Donald Trump and the Republicans on that basis. So I don't see that changing, to be honest, too much between now and 2024. I think they're kind of locked into their strategy. I mean, look at what Biden's going around talking about. He sounds like it's the Weimar Republic, 1932, right? The stormtroopers are about to take over your town, so vote for me.
Yeah, it's not. I saw that, and I'm like, my hands are in my face, and I'm like, that's not the way. It is more divisive for people that legitimately. It's coming from a place of not really trying to understand why 70 million plus people are going to vote for Trump again, because he's actually talking to their concerns. And the difference here, which I can't understand, is you have legislative wins. Look, I talk to people all the time and they'll say, well, yeah. Unemployment, inflation's down, unemployment's down. Okay, the interest rates, and okay, stock market's up, and and all that. I hear that. Okay, but you know what? It doesn't feel like the economy's doing good. I'm still paying $8 for eggs at the store, and that it doesn't feel like that, right? Okay, so you go around the country, instead of saying like it's the Fourth Reich, you go around and you say, listen, we get it. The pandemic really, really hit us. It was like another kind of depression almost. It really hit us. It hit us hard. We have a lot of work to do. I feel your pain. I know it's expensive. I know we're trying. But let's look at the trend lines here. We're not there, but we're getting there. We're going to give me 4 more years, and we're going to be, really acknowledge their pain, acknowledge it doesn't feel great, but there's been some progress, and keep it all economics. Because here's what I don't understand. These places in the Rust Belt states are still working class people, and they're it's not just white folks, but there's white and black and Latino working class people. You can't not talk to those people and just talk to college educated folks. Like, you just can't do. You can't. The math doesn't add up when the electoral college hits, and we're looking at Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, maybe Ohio, and trying to. You need 6-7 states to win the election. And like, why would you not talk to their concerns, especially if, Hitler reincarnated in Trump, as how it sounds, right, is going to do that. He's going to talk to them just on those things and be like, remember the good old years with me? Yeah, it was a little crazy, but we had a good economy, right? You had jobs, right? Gas wasn't this. Eggs were $4. And that's not untrue.
He's got a rap. He's got a rap. And I think Democrats really underestimate it to their peril. I mean, if there's a number of polling findings that are absolutely gobsmacking in this respect. If you ask people who did a better job with the economy, Biden so far or Trump when he was president, you get like 20-point advantage for Trump.
Of course.
And that includes even more among working class people, among Latinos. I mean, it's just like serious stuff, man. Or like, did the policies of the Biden administration helped or hurt you? More people say hurt than help. And the policies of the Trump administration hurt or help you. Most people say help. So this is like obviously like kind of a problem. You need to like chip away at that as best you can and not act like, well, okay. But, on the other hand, you realize that we're about to, have the Fourth Reich, as you were putting it. I think, again, for like the college educated, liberalish people in places like New York and Austin and Seattle and lots of places, they say, oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, my God, we got to stand up and stop this fascist from taking over the U.S. But that's how they feel. But you have to deal with the electorate you have, not the electorate you would like to have, right?
Yeah.
So I just think Democrats really have a hard time with that. And I think it reflects the way the party itself, as I was saying, has evolved over the last several decades. And importantly, what we talk about in our book, the shadow party, the penumbra of activist groups, nonprofits, foundations, academia, good chunks of the media. I mean, they're all kind of the amen corner for the Democrats on a lot of this stuff. And they're very much bought into the cultural transformation of the Democratic Party. And it really influences the Democrats not to pay attention to the actually existing views of working class people and how complicated they are and how they feel Democrats look down on them and don't really speak to them. I mean, look, if Trump is as dangerous as people say, this is not one of my favorite themes. Okay, let's say he's Hitler light or whatever. Okay, don't we need a popular front against Trumpism? Why aren't you compromising on everything under the sun to get that marginal voter out there who doesn't has questions about you and thinks you're too far out on certain issues? Just sell out, man. Just, compromise on everything and try to get as many people into the tent as possible, if the stakes are as high as you say they are. But here's the weird thing. The people who are most hysterical about Trump are precisely the people who don't want to compromise on anything.
Yeah.
So go figure, right? I mean, like the people on the border stuff, the immigration deal, the Republicans are trying to cut on Ukraine and Israel aid and the border. The reason there hasn't been a deal so far is not because the Republican, in my opinion, the Republican ideas are so crazy. It's because there's a big sector of the party and the activist groups that are putting pressure on the party, the shadow party, that don't want any change, really. I mean, they think it's all, to basically tighten up at the border and basically tighten up the asylum system, do away with the parole thing or modify it. I mean, it's all the worst kind of xenophobia and borderline racism. So that makes it hard for the Democrats to make a deal, even though they'd be well advised to do so. And that would put them more in the wheelhouse of a lot of voters. And this is an issue in which the Democrats are like a 20-point disadvantage.
Yeah. To me, there's
best able to handle the issue. So what is the problem here? Why? This is politics 101. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we might come to immigration in a bit. I mean, I just don't understand. Like, the fact remains, there are reasons why, but there are 4.5 million people that have come into this country illegally across the border since 2021. I mean, there is an issue.
It's a lot of humans.
There is an issue. Like
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't understand why, if you don't have a legitimate issue on immigration, if it's
Mm-hmm.
some kind of, we need to be kind to people and we need to help people out, and maybe some people say open borders. Well, that's not really a policy issue. And you got the other side just, I mean, basically giving them free points to saying, look, we got a plan. We're going to do this, 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 and this. And it might be the most draconian measures, but at least it's a plan. And people are like, well, listen, I mean, it's kind of extreme, but like the other side isn't even offering a plan.
Right. The Democrats' plan is not to have a plan, right? I mean,
like, how does that happen?
You can make the argument that it's very plausible. I mean, we need to overhaul the immigration system, change the mix of skilled and unskilled, have different criteria than we currently do. We need to modify the asylum and parole system. We need a system. We need an overhaul.
Yes.
But the people lying down on the railroad tracks about this stuff, really, they don't really want to change much because the way it's working now, if you're for quasi-open immigration and you feel like basically anyone who in some other country who feels oppressed, that lives in a disorderly, violent society or an economically poor society or both, we must welcome them all.
Right.
Well, you can't welcome them.
No, you
it's
can't.
Crazy.
Yes.
Countries have borders for a reason. And it used to be, wasn't that long ago, Democrats understood this a lot better than they do now. The Jordan Commission, which we talk about in our book, which looked at the immigration system in the 80s, headed by Barbara Jordan, a Democrat, was basically tried to lay sort of set a series of criteria for tightening up the immigration system, for implementing E-Verify. And the basic premise was we actually need to tamp down somewhat on levels of immigration. We need to really get the system under control because uncontrolled immigration puts pressure on low-wage workers, puts pressure on resources, and is bad for us politically in many ways. And that shouldn't be the intent of our immigration system, is just to let as many people in as possible. We have to think about the people who live here and work here. And I think that's back to the Latino working class. I think one thing Democrats really don't understand is that a lot of Latino working class voters are not like 150% for having a gazillion people come over the border all the time, because they see it as not a benefit to them, but actually somewhat of a problem. Of course, the closer you are to the border, there's a pressure on resources and so on. So, it's really kind of shocking in a way that there's such resistance to trying to do something about this when it's so obviously, it's not even very left-wing. I mean, remember when
it's not.
Bernie Sanders used to talk about open borders? That's a Koch brothers plan, He doesn't talk like that anymore because he's been taken over by the blob to some extent. Well, not completely. I mean, I like Bernie, but he was really influenced in 2020 by the way the party had moved to the left on all these sociocultural issues, and he kind of moved with them. But back when he was class against class, Bernie, I thought that was a better look. But anyway,
I want to talk about like kind of coalitions of sorts and about populism. So we'll come to Latinos in a minute, but you give this nice history in the book about, you kind of start with FDR and the New Deal, and you talk about Johnson era, and you even talk a little bit about Clinton, things like that. And there have been, you mentioned obviously Obama and stuff. There's been these big kind of periods where Democrats really have had a pretty good coalition of different types of folks. And there was something interesting in 2016 where many people that went for Bernie in 2016, especially in like Michigan and Wisconsin, they immediately switched to Trump. Right. And it was, populism is an interesting thing because, I mean, I'm not a big fan of populism, but I mean, I get it, but populism is really kind of the same, left or right, right? The rhetoric is sort of similar. Some of the policies for when they are there are similar. There are differences. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but it doesn't, otherwise it wouldn't make sense that someone that's going to be a Bernie bro and at a rally and, stomp the 1% is going to be like, well, he gets, booted off the island here, so to speak, and we got Hillary Clinton. Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to Trump. Because he was doing another brand of populism. So again, so this is, 8 years ago now. Where do you think, in terms of coalitions, so we can talk about the populism in the Midwest and kind of working class there, white working class, at least for a minute, where do you think that is, right? Because even if you look at like so-called, MAGA world, right? people vote for Trump for different reasons, right? You got, yes, the very hateful, racist, xenophobic people, but that's not 70 million people that are that way. Many people voted. Some people I know voted for Trump just because of the Supreme Court. They knew he was going to get one or two picks, and that paid off for those people very well. Other people, they voted him for different reasons. So what is these coalitions on kind of the Republican side and the Democrat side currently? What does that look like?
Right. Well, I think that, that was really Trump's genius, is realizing that what this country really needs, what the Republican Party really needs, is a genuine populist politician, because he understood that the working class base of the Republican Party was expanding, and that these people were not happy campers. They basically, not only did they hate Democratic elites, which is part of the reason they were voting Republican, but they kind of hate Republican elites too.
Yeah.
So I'm going to run against those people in the primaries, and I'm going to beat their ass, which he did. He managed to successfully portray them all as part of the establishment.
Very easily.
And then he had the perfect foil in Hillary Clinton, sort of with her Wall Street speeches and her basket of deplorables and so on. She was just like a poster child for Democratic elite. So he was able to run the same playbook, populist playbook, against her, and moved a lot of those white working class voters into the Republican column. And, I think really the thing I think the Biden administration doesn't understand, a lot of Democrats don't understand, is the situation we're in is not that different now. Populism is still extremely strong. People really do hate the elites of both parties. And now, in addition to this white working class problem, and it looks like Trump, if you look at the available data, he's doing about as well as he did in 2016, maybe even a little better. But he's also doing better among non-white working class voters, especially Hispanic. So, that's potentially a mighty populist coalition. And I think the Biden people are acting like, again, this is really all about saving democracy. And
that's just not selling for me.
People it is, but for a lot of these voters who do respond to populism, the kind of people who would have gone for Bernie and then for Trump, the kind of people who look around today and say, I don't know. I'm not that happy with Biden. Maybe I'll vote for RFK Jr. Maybe I'll wind up voting for Trump. They hate them all. Yeah. Right. And so Trump is better able to portray himself as the outsider populist who's going to tear down the elites, even though I think his actual record of doing stuff is not that great. But, that's not how elections are frequently decided. And I think that is kind of where we are now, where that working class size hole of the Democratic coalition that was blasted to some extent by Trump's populist message is still there, and is even arguably widening in some ways, and somewhat counterbalanced. Again, if you look at the data, Democrats are doing even better than Biden and Hillary Clinton did in 2016 among college-educated voters. So the two things are moving in different directions. But here's the problem. Like 65% of the voters in this country are non-college educated. If you get equal-sized moves toward the Democrats and toward the Republicans among these respective groups, it nets out very poorly for the Democrats. And I think that's the potential problem they have in this election. Now, they say, by the time the election is held, Trump will have said all these stupid things, and we'll have another year to sort of dump on him, and people will come around, especially Hispanics, especially young people, especially et cetera, et cetera. So,
I think it's such a, I don't know who's in Biden world that's saying this stuff, because I just think it's really delusional. Number one, if you have such a sizable percentage of the electorate is still non-college educated, you have to go talk to those people. They're still going to go vote. Number two, especially if the other guy's going to do it. Number two, this whole let's save democracy, it's not convincing to me. The third thing on this is that, you need to have, people moved for something, and people are kind of dulled with, Trump's not as extreme anymore. Like, people know who he is. They know he's going to say wild shit. No one cares, right? He's not even online that much anymore. So people are just kind of like, he's not that bad. We're used to it now. That's a great point. I just don't think that's going to be selling point.
Again, I think this is something that people who make Democratic Party policy and strategic decisions, and sort of the activists who put pressure on the party, don't understand. Because for them, whenever Trump makes a statement that's widely publicized, that's fairly awful.
Mm-hmm.
They're like steam comes out of their ears. They're just like so upset. But what they don't realize is out there in the vastness we call America, especially among working class folks, is like it's just like water off a duck's back.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really give a shit.
No,
you know?
they don't.
I mean, pardon my French.
No,
but,
they don't. They don't. And
it's just because it's just noise.
Right.
It's just
that's
noise.
exactly what it is. And at the end of the day, at least he's talking to me. He's telling me what, we're going to get rid of the elites. We're going to do these things. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. He evokes feeling in masses of people that people can get behind. And, I think some of, talking about elites and stuff like that. I mean, I think all the stuff with the pandemic really soured people even more for institutions and elites, and so I actually think, when people say, oh, he's polling better than 2016 or the same or better, it's like, yeah, that's not surprising. I mean, it's not surprising at all. So
the pandemic thing I think is important actually, and actually is a significant influence on especially Hispanic voters, I actually think, because Democrats became associated with locking down the country and the economy for a longer time than was really necessary. I think it's pretty clear. And that screwed up a lot of people in terms of their livelihoods. And, they closed the schools way too long.
Yeah, way too long. I think most people agree on that.
That really hurts working class people the most.
Of course.
So, it's like Democrats, like they think they've got this little halo over their heads because of how they did in the pandemic. But that's not the way a lot of normie voters see it. They think the Democrats went overboard. Not that they didn't think COVID was a problem, but they just feel they were dragooned into, doing these things, and these policies were sort of laid on them. And a lot of them didn't work that well in the long run. And they really don't trust them, really, I think, on an issue like this. And I think the Democrats felt like, well, once the pandemic went away, everything would be fine. But I think these things have lingering effects. They do in terms of how people view the different parties. So
I would fully agree with that. I think that a lot of people feel it might not be front of mind, but I think a general, do you trust people in politics or institutions? I think when it comes, you see exit polls and it comes like that, that's where that kind of stuff kind of filters back up. And it's like, oh yeah, last time we had kind of a big crisis, like they went overboard. I don't want that again. So I think it shakes out there. Okay, so let's talk about Latinos. So, as I've told you, so I think I've been very frustrated for the past 4 or 5 years with how Democrats work with Latinos. So I'm first generation. My eggs hatched here, but my dad came here from Central America in the early '80s, and I think out of everybody that writes about the interaction between Latinos and Democrats, I mean, you've had the right calculus. Your pulse on this is perfect. I think pitch perfect on what's going on here. So you can talk about this, but in your mind, I think it really started around 15, 16, and you can talk about that if you want, and then where we're at currently. But what kind of big picture here for a minute? Why do you think people are? I'm not, but a lot of people are, and that's a problem in itself. People are surprised when they see or hear Latinos shifting to Trump or Republicans or already there. And my kind of approach to this is, if I meet someone and I don't really know them and I know they're, first or second generation Latino, I expect them to be kind of Republican, they're center right or more right, based on how things are at the moment. So that's kind of my prior, and people are always surprised by that. Why do you think we've seen a bigger shift with Trump in 16? And then, there was some, it wasn't as bad in 20 or 22, but it was still not as great. Why are we seeing Latinos doing that?
Well, I think, a fundamental misunderstanding of the population. I mean, obviously a very variegated population with a lot of different countries of origin, but I think to some extent, Democrats looked at things like exit poll results and other things, say, oh, look, this is a 2-to-1 Democratic group. I mean, they're like ours, right? I mean, all we got to do is run some Democrat out there because we're the pro-immigrant party. We're the party that's against racism. We just got to keep doing the voodoo that we do, and we'll keep all those Hispanics voting for us. But one thing that they didn't, I think, understand is, one, Hispanics are not a particularly liberal population, just in terms of ideology. Most are moderate and a big chunk are conservative.
Mhm.
And they were voting above their ideology for the Democratic Party. So these were always votes that were not 100% secure
Mhm.
because the Democrats were in a way getting a premium out of these voters. And that relates to why did people vote for? Yeah, because they were somewhat more friendly to immigrants, certainly against discrimination. But they were the party was for the Hispanic community, for a working class communities, patriotic, upwardly mobile, concerned about their kids, their community, healthcare, what have you. I mean, they were just better for people like us than the other side. But that's different than thinking of them as people of color,
Yeah.
which became very prominent in the mid-teens and is still with us today. Oh, they're basically part of this mass of non-white people in the United States who, are just a bubble with resentment about this country, and they think they live in this dystopian hellhole we call America, and the brown people and black people are just oppressed every day. And what Democrats are about is we're going to lift up these people against the scourge of white supremacy. And this is like, what?
Mhm.
That's not why I'm here. I'm here to get ahead in the world. I'm here to, make something of myself and my family. I mean, I like America.
Mhm. Mhm.
What's the problem here?
Mhm.
So I just think that dissonance that starts developing between the way Democrats are thinking about Hispanics and the way Hispanics think about themselves. And, they just are fundamentally a working class community
Mhm.
who think of themselves as just who they are. They don't think of themselves. Completely ridiculous. So I think that starts moving a lot of these voters towards, in a sense, voting their ideology, voting their relative conservatism on some issues, and basically just looking at the other party and saying, well, maybe my default option of voting for the Democrats was not correct. Maybe I need to let's open my mind and think about who's doing whatever, for me and my family and my community, and get rid of that presumption that I'm going to vote Democratic. And I think once you do that, that spreads, right? It becomes more permissible
Mm.
to vote Democratic, vote against the Democrats, to vote for the Republicans. And, they don't process the kinds of things Trump says as, the kind of way, white college educated voters
Mhm.
process it. It's just, oh, horrible. They think about, hey, it's kind of funny. I mean,
Mhm.
he's telling it like it is. Yeah, I
Mm.
don't agree with everything, but at least he's not a bullshit.
Mhm.
Bullshit,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's huge.
Yeah.
And I think then when you walk into like how well Hispanics did economically in the first part in the Trump years before the pandemic, it was pretty good.
Mhm.
There were tight labor markets then too. Wages and incomes were going up. It's looked back with fondness by a lot of Hispanic working class voters today. So I think the broad concept here is Democrats had this assumption that, Hispanics belong to them. This is a community that's primarily concerned about immigration and being people of color.
Mhm.
And that was just completely wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that is not the way they experience the world, not what they think about. It's not what they get up in the morning and,
No, it's not. It's definitely not. It's a few things here. I mean, I've talked about it a little bit here for listeners. I think it's hard. I have a kind of resistance. I mean, you tell me what you think about this, but of the Latino vote, I mean, I understand that you have to kind of, kind of draw lines around something, but I just think that Latino as a group is really hard to do, even in the United States. I mean, there's over 22 countries in Latin America that are Spanish majority, Spanish speaking. But a lot of people in the United States don't realize that Guatemala is demonstrably different than Chile, and Dominican Republic is demonstrably different than Nicaragua, right? Like I mean, there's some similarities, right? The food, the language, the music, whatever, but there is difference. There's big difference. And then you kind of put more onto that is, well, which wave of immigration did you come here, and why?
Right.
Are you coming here
And
from
what
Central
generation
America
are you?
because of civil war and poverty? Are you coming here on a work visa from Argentina or from Brazil or wherever else? Or are you coming here from Mexico to get from drug lords and from poverty? Are you coming from Cuba, third generational wave, not from 1960, not from 1990, but like 2005? And you've already got three grandmas living over here in South Florida. Like, there's just so much difference in waves of immigration, countries of origin, and then where you root in the United States. So living outside of Los Angeles is much different than living in South Florida, which is different than, Puerto Ricans and Dominican Republic, people from the Dominican Republic that have lived in New York for, many, many years. That's different from West Texas and out in Nevada. So and even, Latinos that live everywhere in, Pennsylvania and even in the Midwest, I don't know how you conceptualize Latinos, like the Latin vote, in that way. You can't really do it. I think you have to kind of do it sort of geographically, no? You have to kind of say, Latinos are in this community, they're in Arizona, or they're in West Texas or South Florida. What's going on in that community? That are their issues. And in that way, many Latinos, if you will, do kind of align with like a white or black working class mindset. Many of them come here for economic reasons, and they're working with, poor or middle class whites and poor middle class blacks. That's much different than you go ask somebody from from Honduras that's living in Minnesota and they're working at McDonald's and maybe they got another job. What do they think about the border, or what do they think about being a person of color? They're like, I don't give a shit. Like I got bills to pay, and I'm
get out of here.
And I'm sending half of this back home, because my family needs it. Like, how do Democrats kind of conceptualize, I guess, Latinos a little bit better, more accurately, and then speak to like them as working class people mostly? How can they do that?
Right. Well, I think you're right. I mean, it's Latinos, Hispanics. I mean, it's a convenience category. It melds together tons of people from different countries, origins, generations, what have you, that have this sort of overarching commonality, which isn't much of a commonality for this big a group.
Yeah.
So I think if you start thinking about them in the way you're talking about it, like specific communities, specific groups, specific geographical areas, specific countries of origin, I think it forces you to start thinking about them as the people they are and the lives they actually live, rather than this made up, sort of commonality of oppression they supposedly all share.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be very useful for Democrats to take that more seriously. And frankly, there's a lot of snake oil being sold to Democrats by various consultants who claim they have a handle on the Latino vote, when precisely for some of the reasons you're outlining, that vote is so variegated and so sort of complex in composition. To really talk about it as Latino vote is something we should be very careful about. And there are no magical solutions. And if there is, the best solution is just to understand them, who they are, where they are, what they care about. And that's hard. That's hard. There isn't a one size fits all here. So, I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And I think it's led the Democrats down some paths that have not been productive for them.
My dad used to say something all the time. People would ask him like, "Oh, where do you kind of stand on things politically or whatever?" And my dad used to say, "My party is the one that keeps me with work and jobs going. That's my party." That was always that was his answer.
Your dad had it right, man.
And I think that's just a thing. I wrote a piece in Newsweek a couple years ago about how we should conceptualize basically Latinos, mostly, not everybody, but mostly, as how we talk to working class people in Southern Virginia or Northwest Pennsylvania, or not. If you were to talk to Latinos more that way, generally speaking, I think you would see more results, because honestly, in terms of in the electorate, you've written about this a lot. Trump's getting higher numbers with non-educated Latinos. There was that 16-point shift to Trump, and this is with Cubans and Mexicans and Puerto Ricans. Pew Research, obviously, they put out good stuff, and they're showing that Latinos care about economy and healthcare. I mean, those things are always at the top. Immigration's like fifth or sixth. Like it's not something top of mind for them.
Right.
So
climate's even farther down.
Yeah, I mean, so how do we? I mean, it's been kind of worse. So for this year, you're advising the Biden campaign, and we need to get Latinos to get in the polls and vote for us. Ruy, what should we do? What should the Biden campaign comes? What do we do? What do we do for 2024? Top of the ticket and even bottom of the ticket and we're talking about in certain districts and even for states or for senators. How should Democrats kind of talk to Latinos so they're not flirting over going with to the right? What should be the answer?
Well, I think it's really what we were talking about before, isn't it? I mean, sort of really digging down into their day-to-day concerns around the economy and healthcare and prices, and putting things in front of them that suggest you get it, you care, and you actually have something that looks at least sort of like a solution, or you've done things that are actually, have an effect, and don't basically run on, protecting democracy and abortion rights. I mean, you should talk about that some, but make the focus of what you say different. Appeal to those voters where they are, because they don't get up in the morning and think about, how they, this is a Weimar Republic 1932 and Hitler is about to take power. They just don't.
Right.
So, okay, accept that. Maybe you think they should. That's fine. You can think whatever you want. Think about them the way they are and talk to them where they are. And I think that'll lead to a much more productive relationship with these kind of voters than they currently have, because it's not working. At least, we look at the polls right now. It doesn't seem to be working. So, yeah, I think that the happy talk is by the time November 2024 rolls around, they'll all come back, come home to the Democrats, because they'll realize Orange Man is bad and so on. And, Democrats are really great. So, but I think they'd be well advised to not wait that long. I think voters are, starting to tune in. Obviously, it won't really get going totally until the fall.
Right.
But so far, not so good.
Yeah.
And I think it does reflect Democrats' mistakes and how they're thinking about these voters.
Yeah.
And the image of the party and how that the party appears to these voters.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. So 2 final questions here.
Okay.
You talk about in the book, and we won't traverse it mostly because I find these topics overplayed. I love the way you guys treated it and handled it, but you talk about many cultural issues. You talk about, George Floyd in 2020, the pandemic, BLM, kind of gender issues, sensationalism around climate. And I guess, people have had different answers for this. It's media, it's social media, it's the internet, it's, whatever. And I think those definitely have impact. But why do you feel like I think there's really well-intentioned people out there, but a lot of the times, at least for the Democrats, they get very kind of this sort of audience capture where a few folks really talk and pull on their heartstrings of sorts. And on the cultural issues, it becomes so radioactive, where it's just, you can't have a kind of moderate balance. If I care about climate change at a 6, if I don't care about it at a 12, then I just don't care about it. You're not on our team. And just literally take every issue, race, gender, all these cultural issues.
If you're against discriminating against, trans people, then, that's not enough. You've got to actually support so-called gender-affirming care and, biological males competing on women's teams and all that. There's a whole vector of things you're supposed to agree to if you're a good person.
Right.
And this is insane. Most people don't believe this stuff.
Right.
Most working class people don't believe this stuff. They don't. So why are you doing this? Why are you insisting that it's not enough just to be a tolerant person?
This is my question. Why did they do this? Why did they go full, all the way on this stuff? That's not to say the right doesn't have their style too.
I think there's two basic reasons. One is, the shadow party, which we talked about. The extent to which the Democrats have become influenced by the shadow party, this group of institutions, activist groups, nonprofits, academia, huge sections of the media. In a way, one way I think about it sometimes, is they control the commanding heights of cultural production. Democrats are really responsive to that. So they're afraid. They're afraid to cross these people. And not only are they afraid, but partly because the messages a lot of Democrats who try to make decisions about things receive, it's almost like they get captured by these ideas. They can't think outside of them anymore. They start falsifying their own preferences and discarding their own skepticism and say, "Oh yeah, well, I guess this is the way it has to be." The second thing is that underneath it all, I think if you push them, there's usually a political calculation, which I think is wrong, but it's still there, which is that, okay, yeah, well, maybe we have gone a bit too far in this stuff. Maybe we should dial it back. Maybe we should move to the center. I can see what you're saying. But if we did that, We would lose so many voters on the left wing of our party who would sit out the election. We would tank their enthusiasm, and we'd lose more than we gain. And I just think that's wrong. I think there's so many persuadable voters out there.
Yeah.
And where are these people going to go anyway? They're going to vote for Trump.
Right.
I mean, most of them will still vote for the Democrats, even if you had a more reasonable position on race and on immigration and on trans issues and so on. But they're like a paper tiger, as I wrote in something I wrote recently. A lot of these groups basically act like they have control over tens of millions of voters. But here's a secret: they don't. They speak primarily for themselves and, the foundations that fund them. I mean, so I say take a risk, see what they got. But I think Democrats are still very timid about that.
Yeah.
And I don't expect that to change much between now and 2024.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so either. But I totally agree with you. That's my same response. It's like, okay, so it's not this. Because Biden's not talking about this thing, or not even him, other people. It's not like they're going to go and vote for Trump or anybody on the Republican part. Like, so you're afraid they're not going to vote? Yeah, you're going to get that every election. Like, I don't think it's going to be that amount of numbers.
No, they really somehow they envision this catastrophic fall off and turnout among certain. And it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say it's going to happen, but it probably won't, and you don't have any power over these people anyway. And this is going to be a high information, hotly contested election. Most people are going to turn out anyway. Yeah.
So, I agree with you on that. So the last question here is, kind of what's where do Democrats go? And I guess just liberals. There's a piece in the end of the book where you talk about Democrats can be liberal on economics, maybe a little bit more moderate and conciliatory on some of the cultural issues. How do we get there, regardless of what happens in 24, whether it's Biden or Trump or someone else maybe? But how do Democrats try to? I don't want to hear Van Jones on November 9th or whatever saying like this was a reckoning. We got to take a hard look in the mirror and all these things. And they say that every election, right? It's like how do they not do that?
Right.
Nothing against Van Jones. I'm just saying like how do they not do that and just kind of be a little more proactive and say, okay, how do we really get some electoral wins? What do you think?
Well, if I knew the exact answer to that, I'd be a happy man, maybe a rich man. I don't know. But I think that if you start from the premise, and I think this is solid historically speaking, Democrats have done the best and been the most effective as a party, but they've been viewed as the party of the common man and woman, the ordinary American, been viewed as patriotic. I mean, go back to FDR. Look at the kinds of very progressive economic program, but they were not particularly radical in cultural terms at all.
Yeah.
The Blue Eagle was a symbol, and the lighting of the Christmas tree and Thanksgiving, and we're all paid. I mean, this is like great. This is a great idea. You want to unify Americans, and if Democrats could convince themselves that, actually some of the stuff that Obama. Some of his tropes were pretty good. Yeah. So why not revive those and say, we don't want to divide people anymore. We want to bring people together, and we want to sort of, we think we need to tweak the economy and have these kinds of programs because they're good for working people. But we really got to stop all this culture war stuff. It's like just completely fucked up. And here's A, B, and C, and D over. We're really going to approach some of these issues differently, and I think that would work. Probably. I mean, if you look at what the center of the American electorate thinks about most of these issues, they're not in the Democrats' wheelhouse on the cultural issues. They're pretty close to the wheelhouse on some of the economic issues, not necessarily the climate stuff, which again, is I think very culturized. But I think there's a there that if they moved to the center purposively and tried to do it, it would actually probably work. But will they do that? As you say, there's always going to be a post-election thing. Well, it didn't quite work out like we thought. We got to do things better, different. But I'll believe the different when I see it. But keep hope alive. And we, in a way, I mean, we wrote the book not to give the Democrats advice so much as to point out what kind of party does America need. It's kind of like back to your dad. You need a party that your dad would look at and say, absolutely,
right.
Those guys rock. So,
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I totally agree. Well, the book is called Where Have All the Democrats Gone? The Soul of the Party in the Age of Extremes. It's out now. So you got the book. I know you're on Substack. I know you're in all these places. So, anywhere else people should find you or best places to look for you?
Yeah, definitely the Liberal Patriot, because I write a column every week for them, post more like once a month. And I'm here in I'm on lots of podcasts like this wonderful podcast with Xavier.
That's great.
So keep an eye out for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really have been reading your stuff for a while, and I like what you have to say. So keep putting out the good stuff, and I'm sure you'll be very busy this year in the election year. So big thanks.
Oh yeah, it's going to be crazy, man.
It will. Yes, it will. All righty. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.